The night he made his choice, even the stars dimmed as if the heavens themselves mourned for him. The palace stood silent, majestic and cold, while inside, a war raged that no one could see. On one side lay his crown, duty, legacy, the future of a kingdom that carried his name. On the other side lay her, love, warmth, and the life he had always wanted but could never have. He stood there, torn between the world that demanded him and the soul that begged to be free. And in that silence, he did what every prince was taught to do, he chose the kingdom. But in doing so, he felt something within him break that no amount of gold could mend. Her face lingered in his mind long after she was gone. He could still see her eyes, not angry, not pleading, but full of understanding, the kind that hurt the most. She had always known he would choose duty over desire. That was the tragedy of loving a man born with a crown. She had loved him knowing she might one day become a memory he'd be forbidden to keep. When she walked away, she didn't cry. She smiled through the ruin, as if to say, I knew this was coming. That smile would haunt him more than any goodbye ever could. The palace celebrated his decision, the royal family called it noble, the people called it destiny. But no one noticed how quiet he had become. The sparkle that once danced in his eyes was gone, replaced by a sorrow too dignified to be spoken aloud. He smiled when he was supposed to, ruled with grace, and wrote poetry that broke hearts around the world. Yet every line he wrote was a confession disguised as art. The world saw poetry, she would have seen pain. Every verse was an echo of the love he couldn't keep and couldn't let go of either. Nights became his punishment. When the world slept and duty no longer demanded his attention, memories of her flooded in like tides breaking through stone. He could still feel her laughter in the wind, still hear her voice in the silence between his breaths. Sometimes, he'd reach for the space beside him, expecting her warmth, only to find the emptiness colder than marble. The crown on his head glittered under the moonlight, mocking him with its brilliance. It was everything he had chosen, and everything he would never love. He often wandered through the palace gardens at dawn, where the dew glistened like tears the earth hadn't wiped away. That was where he felt her the most, in the flowers she once admired, in the soft rustle of leaves that seemed to whisper her name. He wrote poems on his heart and buried them where only the wind could read. To the world, he was the perfect ruler. To himself, he was a man who had traded eternity for a crown that felt heavier with each passing day. There were days when he convinced himself he had done the right thing. The kingdom needed him, the people adored him, and history would call him wise. But then he would see a woman laughing freely in the crowd, or catch a scent that reminded him of her, and the illusion would shatter. He would realize that wisdom means nothing when the heart is empty. He could rule 1,000 lives and still never find the one he truly wanted. The ache of it became part of his existence, a wound he learned to wear with royal grace. She had told him once, love doesn't disappear, it transforms. He didn't understand then. But years later, as he stood in the same halls they once walked together, he realized she was right. Her love hadn't vanished, it had become his shadow, following him through every decision, every triumph, every silence. He saw her reflection in the ocean when he sailed, her memory in the laughter of children, her voice in the rhythm of the desert wind. Love, he learned, never dies, it just hides in the spaces life leaves behind. The poets who read his work called him romantic, visionary, mysterious. None of them knew that every metaphor was her. The moon he wrote about was her calmness. The storm was his regret. The desert, his loneliness. He never wrote her name, yet she was in every syllable. His poetry became the only place he could still hold her, safely, secretly, endlessly. When the world applauded his art, they were unknowingly clapping for the woman who had given him both the wound and the words. Sometimes, he wished he
Years passed, yet the echo of her name lingered like a secret hymn in the palace corridors. He could not escape her shadow, it followed him into every throne room, every decision, every lonely dawn. The courtiers thought the prince had grown wiser, calmer, more reflective, they called it maturity, but it was mourning dressed in silence. He had learned to wear his pain like a royal robe, invisible yet ever present. Every law he signed, every smile he gave, carried the weight of a love buried beneath layers of duty. She was gone, but her absence ruled him more powerfully than any crown ever could. On certain nights, he would walk to the highest balcony, where the desert stretched endlessly under the moonlight. The wind carried whispers, soft and haunting, as though the dunes themselves remembered her footsteps. He'd close his eyes and imagine her beside him, not as a ghost, but as a feeling, the same warmth that once steadied his heartbeat. He would whisper her name into the vast emptiness, and sometimes, he thought the wind answered back. It was there he understood that love doesn't vanish, it transforms into air, into starlight, into the silence that never leaves. The kingdom prospered under his reign, yet he often wondered what it truly meant to win. He had wealth, honor, and power, everything a prince should desire, but none of it filled the quiet ache that lived beneath his ribs. Every time he saw the sunrise over the golden domes of Dubai, he remembered how she used to marvel at it, as if the sky was painted just for her. Now, the colors looked duller. The sun still rose, but it no longer felt like a promise, only a reminder that life goes on, even when the heart refuses to. He began to write again, not for the world, but for her. His poems became letters to the past, written in ink but sealed in tears. He spoke to her through verses, asking questions the wind could never answer. Do you still walk where we once dreamed? Do you still smile at the thought of what could have been? His words carried both hope and resignation, love and loss. The poems never reached her, but perhaps they were never meant to. They were his only way of keeping her alive, not in memory, but in meaning. There were times he would catch glimpses of her in strangers, a tilt of the head, a certain laugh, a familiar scent, and his heart would forget it was broken for a fleeting moment. But then reality would remind him, the woman he loved belonged to another life, one he had chosen to leave behind.